Okay, so today's daf is Tzadi Gimel. We're going to start on Tzadi Bet, Amud Bet, about 6 lines or 7 lines from the bottom of the page. Now, the discussion here was for the last daf, for those who followed the daf on Shabbat, the last daf talked about, or really the last Amud, starting on the last Amud, began talking about issues of where you have a large area and a small area off of it, like a large room and there's a small room off of it. You have something which is wider and then something which is smaller that it opens to, or a large courtyard opening to a smaller courtyard. And the halachic implications of this, that generally speaking, the small is considered to be an extension of the large, but the large is not considered to be an extension of the small. Okay? So something that, so there are a lot of halachic implications of this. So for instance, if there are 9 people in the minyan, and they're in the large room, and there's 1 person in the small room, we can add him. But if the 9 people are in the small room, and there's only 1 in the large room, we can't add him. In other words, the base has to be always the large one. And then Abaye was saying that there's a problem with some of these halachot, that it seems like sometimes a mechitza, sometimes putting a wall makes a problem. Okay, sometimes putting a wall that where you have a situation. For instance, one of the cases was where you had a vineyard planted in a large area. Okay, and you want to plant other seeds in the small area. So that started on the previous Amud. It said that if you have a vineyard in the large area and you want to now sow seeds in the small area, you can't. But if you had a vineyard in the small area and you want to sow seeds in the large area, you can, because we don't impose the small area status on the large area. Okay, so according to Abaye, this shows a problem, that mechitzot, the walls, create a bigger problem than you would have without walls. Why? Because if you had a wall, all you would have to do was, he says, if you didn't have a wall, you just have to make 4 amot in between the 2 things, and that's enough. 4 amot of space in between the 2 things would be enough. Here you have a whole big problem, because the wall around the chatzerot is creating a connection that wouldn't be there otherwise. Okay, so as Rashi says, that if you didn't have ilav hanach gifufei she'odfin b'gdola hayu hagdola v'ktana shavot havulu kechatzer achat, that if they were equal, in other words, if you didn't have 1 larger and 1 smaller, so then what you would have is just 1 big room, and in 1 big chatzer you could make a space between the 2 places, and you could plant a vineyard and make a space and plant seeds. Now that you have a wall that divides them, and you have a large chatzer and a small chatzer, now all of a sudden you can't plant any seeds in the small chatzer, no matter how far they are from the large chatzer. How does that creates a problem? So now what happens is so Abaye's premise is that a wall should never create a problem. A wall should only solve a problem. So Amar le Rabbi Zera, this is where we're going to start. So Amar le Rabbi Zera said, La Abaye, Velo matzino mechitza le'isur. Are you telling me that a wall can never create a prohibition? A wall is always helpful. Is that really true? That's not what we learned in the Mishnah. Chatzar gdola shnefetza l'ktana, gdola muteret l'ktana asura, mepnei she'kipitcha shel gedola. Didn't we learn that if you have a large chatzer and it opens into a smaller chatzer, in other words, what happens if you have a large chatzer and you have a smaller chatzer? What you end up having is that the walls of the smaller chatzer, in other words, come in. So if you're standing in the large chatzer, you see on either side of you what are called the gifufim. You see the flanks, you see the 2 sides. If you're standing in the small chatzer, what do you see? Wide open space right into the large chatzer. So he says that in that case, what do you see? That if the large chatzer is open to the small chatzer, so the large chatzer can do whatever they want, but the small chatzer can't. Right? If they don't have an eruv with one another. We're talking about they don't have an eruv with one another. So the large chatzer is considered sealed off from the small chatzer because they have the gifufim, they have the partial wall. But if you're standing in the small chatzer, you don't see any wall on the 4th side. You just see right into the large chatzer. So those people can't carry. Okay, so v'ilu hishvait gifufeha gidola nami asura. So he said, now if you were to come along and put a wall in and smooth out the gifufim. Now what does he mean? Let's see if they have a picture of this to be able to show you what he's trying to describe here. If you were to add a wall, it would create a problem. Look, in other words, normally this is illustration number 328. So you normally have this large chatzer that contains the smaller one, right? So now forget about this wall. Okay, this wall wasn't here. This wall wasn't here. It was just this. So if you're standing in the large chatzer, you would have seen this. But if I put a wall in here, what happens? Now I can't see it anymore. Right? Now I'm not going to be able to see it anymore because you sealed them off. So what do you see? Putting in a wall created a problem. Because here, this is what it looked like before. And what they did was they put a wall here. So if you put a wall here, what do you end up doing? That's in illustration 327. If you put a wall here, you make it all flush with each other. There's no more distinction. So what do you see? A wall can actually remove a distinction, and then what do you have? A bigger problem. So Abaye is going to answer to that. Wait a second. Amar le hatam siluk mechitzotu. You actually proved my point. You didn't disprove my point. Because when you put in those additional two sides, what are you actually doing? Removing walls. Because there were two pieces jutting out before that were creating the division. You put a wall there, and now I can't see them anymore. So your supposed walls actually remove the walls that I had on the fourth side. That doesn't count. Amar le Rava said to him, Abaye, do we not have a case where a wall can create a prohibition? Rava asks. But it was stated, if you have an achsadra is 4 pillars, let's say, that you just put sechach on them. Okay? That what you have is, this achsadra has 2 walls, Rashi says, on either side. And on the third wall, what you end up having is the poles like jut out. So they're like corner pieces. Okay? So because they're corner pieces, you have a little bit jutting out on the third side. You understand what I'm saying? So you have 2 full walls parallel to one another. And on the third side, you have a little bit coming out. So he says, that would be okay, kshera. Why? Because what you have is, you have 2 complete walls, you have a tefach sticking out on the third side, and you have a tzurat petach. It's in the form of a door on the third side. So you're good, because all you need is 2 walls and a little bit more, right? We know that. However, hishva pitzimeha psula. But if you smoothed out the pitzimin, in other words, what it means is doing the same kind of thing. Let's see if they have a picture of this one. So if you smooth it out, in other words, normally what do you have? A wall here and a wall here. You have a wall here and a wall here, and you have these boards sticking out, right? But hishva pitzimah means you closed it off. So now what do you have? There's no more piece jutting out over here anymore because you closed it into like a box. You see that? And that box is flush with the wall in illustration 330. Right? It's flush with the wall over here and it's flush with the wall over here. So before, it was like you had pieces sticking out of the wall. Now you have just a flat piece against the wall on either side. Because hishva pitzimah. So what happens? Adding a wall does what? Creates a problem. Because now it's not a sukkah kshera anymore. Because the sukkah has to have something on those sides and it has nothing now. So Abaye gives the same answer. Amar le Abaye le didi kashera. First of all, according to me, it's kasher anyway. Because according to me, all you need is 2 walls plus a tefach. And you still have a tefach coming out. Le didach. And according to you, siluk mechitzoti. It's still siluk mechitzot. In other words, it's still going to be a removal of mechitzot. Because what did you have? You had the pieces jutting out. And now you sealed them off. You put that mechitzah, it removed what you had. Because they were jutting out before, and now they're flush with the wall. Yeah. Okay, so you're actually not proving me wrong, you're proving me right. Because, so Abaye says, according to you, so according to me, because Abaye and Rava have a machloket about this, that at the end of this parak we're going to see more about it, that even without any wall, we learned earlier, like a achsadra b'bik'ah, that even without any wall, according to Abaye, you can have the ceiling comes down on all 4 sides. So he said, according to me, it's fine anyway. According to you, that doesn't work. Still, what you just did was you gave away your wall. You had pieces sticking out and you sealed them off and made them part of, in other words, what could have been wall number 3 and wall number 4, you made it a part of wall number 1 and wall number 2 by closing it off. See, that's not adding a mechitza, that's removing one. Ve'atanya, but it says nebraita, bayit shechatio mikora v'chatio eino mikora. If you have a house, half of it is roofed and half of it has no roof. So what happens is, gifanim kan mutar lizrakan. That if you put a vineyard, let's say this is like, you're using this as a greenhouse, I don't know, you're using it as a plant. So if you put in the half that's roofed, you put a vineyard, then the half that doesn't have a roof, you can put whatever you want. It's not kilayim bakerim, it's not all in one thing. However, if v'ilo ishvat keruyo asur, but if you were to complete the roofing, then what happens? Now you can't, because it's all one entity. It's all one entity. So if you have gifanim, if you have a vineyard, you can't put seeds. So what do you see? Adding a wall or adding a roof creates a prohibition. So what is Abaye going to do with that? Abaye's shita is that adding a roof or adding a wall can't create prohibition, and here it does. Amarli said again, Hatam siluk mechitzotu. Again, Abaye will tell you, again, that's removal of a mechitza. Why? Because according to Abaye, if you have half of a roof, what do you have? At the edge of the half of the roof, pi tikra yored v'sotem. The edge of the roof, imaginarily, we imagine it that it comes down and seals off as if there were a wall. That's a principle that we have throughout halakha. So we envision like the edge here. Well, this is not the case because this is the sukkah. But we imagine that the edge of the roof comes down and closes off that side.
It's not lavud, but kimat lavud.
No, lavud is where you have a space between two things.
Yeah.
Here we're creating a wall out of nothing just because there's a roof, right? So if there's like an overhang extending from somewhere, we say closed. It's closed. Right? It's one of those similar halachot that creates solid where there's space. Okay? So what does he say? He says, you had a closure there. You had an extra wall. You couldn't see the wall. It was an invisible wall, but there was a wall there. Where the roof ended, we imagine a wall dropping down. But once you close off the rest of the roof, what happens? You don't have an edge anymore. So there's no closure in the middle anymore. It's all open inside and you combined it. So he says, actually, you removed the mechitza that you had. So that's not a good example either. So Abaye has an answer for all of these. And now he says, Shalach le Rav Abaye biad Rav Shemaya. Rava sent a question to Abaye in the hand of Rav Shemaya bar Zera. Velo matzino mechitza leisur. Do we really not find a mechitza leisur that you can have prohibition created by a wall? We say that with regard to the walls in a kerem, in a vineyard, you can have lachmir, you can have lakil and lachmir. Sometimes you can have leniency, sometimes stringency. How so? Ketzad? Kerem anatua ad ikar mechitza. Zorea mekar mechitza ve'elach. That if you were to plant a vineyard up to a wall on one side, on the other side of the mechitza, you can start planting right at the edge of the wall. No problem. However, so and whereas if you didn't have any wall, you would have to separate the vineyard from the other seeds by 4 amot. But since you have the wall, we say they're divided. But, so that's a leniency. Ulhachmir ketzad. What's the case of stringency? Hayam mashuch min hakotel yud aleph ama. If you were far from you were distant from the wall 11 amot, and lo yavi zera lisham. You shouldn't put any seeds in that area, that 11 amma area between where you had your vineyard and the wall. She'il male en machitza marchik daled amot v'zoreah. In other words, what he's saying is that if on one side, if you planted your vineyard right up to the mechitza, then on the other side of the mechitza you can plant whatever you want. But if on the same side of the wall, you have a wall, the coffee cup here's the wall, and over here you made a vineyard, the space in between the vineyard and the wall, if it's 11 amot, you can't plant anything in there. Whereas if you didn't have a wall, what would you be able to do? Just move 4 amot away and plant. So what's happening? This wall is creating a problem, isn't it? It's creating a problem. Before I could just move right in this middle space. Let's say I'm 11. The edge of my vineyard is 11 amot from the wall. I could go into the space 4 amot away from the thing. I'm only 7 amot away from the wall, no problem. But the wall makes a problem. The wall tells me I can't use these 11 amot. So that's an example where a wall is creating a difficulty. So what's Abaye going to do with that? Amar le uleta'amech. But according to you, says Abaye, Otvan mi matnitin. Why do I need that baraita? I'll show you from a Mishnah the same issue. Titnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, kilayim karachat hakerem. If you have a bald spot in a vineyard, we'll see what this means in one moment. Beit Shammai omrim kaf daled amot, uBeit Hillel omrim tetzayin ama. Machol hakerem. If you have the circle of the vineyard, Beit Shammai omrim tetzayin ama, uBeit Hillel omrim yud bet ama. So yeah, they have a drawing.
No. Turn the page. We are in 93.
Oh, in there. Okay. So he says, if you have a case, so they have a machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about the spacing out of things in a vineyard. Okay, so in the first case, which is called karachat hakerem, the bald spot of the vineyard, Beit Shammai says 24 amot, Beit Hillel says 16. And when you have the circle of the kerem, the circle of the vineyard, Beit Shammai says 16, Beit Hillel says 12. So ve'ezo hi karachat hakerem. What does it mean, the bald spot of the vineyard? Kerem shecharav be'emtza'ito. It means that you had a vineyard and in the middle you have a bald spot. It's ruined. In other words, it was cleared out in the middle, in the center. So im en sham tetzayin ama lo yavi zera l'sham. If you had over there 16 amot, now you can plant in the middle. In other words, you have a 16 amah separation between the areas in the vineyard because there's space in between. However, if you had less than that, you can't. Okay, lo yavizer hayusham tetzayin amah. Hayusham tetzayin amah noten emtzait. So he says then noten lo kedei avodato v'zoreah et hamotar. So what you do is, if you had enough space, so that there's a drawing of this in the back. What we can take a look at to help us envision it. So, I have mine in the back. You have yours in that book. It's the same thing. So what it has here is kedei avodato means that you have to make a space. So this is karachat hakerem here. This is the bald spot. It's a good drawing. Drawing number 331. So you have this is the vineyard. You have an open square space in the middle. And what you have is, you need to make a 4 amah wide passageway around the entire thing. Okay? So what you end up having left is, because you take 4 off of this and 4 off of this, you have to have 4 amah separation on all sides. So you're actually going to subtract 8, and you're going to subtract 8. So you're going to end up having an 8 by 8 in the middle, instead of a 16 by 16. Originally you had 16 by 16, now you have 8 by 8 square. Okay? Because you're going to have to subtract 4 from all sides. North, south, east, and west to make the space. Now, we'll see now what the next case is going to be. But, and then he says, so that's what you can do according to Beit Shammai. That's Beit Hillel's view. Okay, Mechol HaKerem is, Ezoi Mechol HaKerem ben HaKerem legader. That if you have between the kerem, between the vineyard and the wall, okay, Shim en sham yud bet amah. If you don't have 12 amot lo yavizera l'sham, you can't put anything in there. That's why we said if you have 11 amot, it's no good, right? If you have 12. Right? If you don't have 12, you can't bring. Okay? So in other words, over there, that's this talking about here. So you have this is the edge of the vineyard. So what do you need here? You need 12 amot. You don't need 16. Okay? Because you have only one area in between. You're not looking at a square within a square. This time you're just looking at the space on the edge between the wall and the vineyard. So you only need to what you're going to need to do here is, you need 4 amot you can put 4 amot of zera in here, 4 amot of planting, 4 amot of space in between what you're planting and the vineyard, and then 4 amot in between there and the wall this time. So it's not, so you're spacing it out differently. You see that? It's not bordered. Your zera is not bordered in this case by two sides of vineyard, but by a wall on one side and a vineyard on the other side. Okay, because it's at the edge of the vineyard. That's what it says in the. The picture illustrates it well. So there, what's the issue? So he's saying that over there, so Abaye says, what does that show you? You were asking me a question. 11 amot. I need 11 amot is not enough away from the wall. It's not enough space away from the wall. That's true. However, why don't you ask me from the Mishnah? The Mishnah shows you the reason. What's the reason over there? So he says anything that's dalid amot legabe kerem avodat kerem. So with regard to the vineyard, you need a space of 4 amot away from the vineyard because you need to let it yourself have the space for the vineyard. So that has nothing to do with the wall, right? That has nothing to do with the wall. That's the 4 amot that you're giving to the kerem. And then why? And the gabe gader kevan de lo mizdaran afkurem mafkalahu de bene bene I ikadalir chashivan vilo lo chashivan. So he says that the 4 amot in between. So he says, Rashi says that kevan de lo mizdaran. That Rashi explains mishum de mekalkel lakotel. That if you try planting too close to the wall, what happens? You're going to ruin the wall. You're going to undermine the structural integrity of the wall. You're going to pull up dirt under the wall, and you're going to weaken the wall. So he says, "Afkure mafkalo." So he says, you give up that legabe gader, velo mitztarfei, and they're not going to be added because you give it out over to the wall. In other words, what he's trying to say is that here what we're dealing with is not an isur really. It's not that the wall is creating a prohibition. It's that we don't use those 4 amot close to the wall because the 4 amot that are close to the wall are needed for the structural integrity of the wall. It's not that the wall creates a bigger prohibition. It's that only a fool is going to plant that close to the wall. He's going to cause the wall to collapse. So we give up that 4 amot to the wall for the sake of the wall, not because there's a prohibition to plant next to the wall. It's not a prohibition. It's a prohibition of the engineer, not of the halakha, because you're going to end up creating a problem. Okay, so when we look at that, you have to give 4 amot to the wall for practical reason, and you have to give 4 amot over to the kerem for the halachic reason. So he says that's not a good example anyway. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Gimel karpefot ze b'tzad ze u'shnei machitzonim migofafim. So now we're talking about a totally different case here. 3 karpefot. A karpaf is an area which is not enclosed for purposes of dira. It's not enclosed for purposes of dwelling. It's enclosed for other purposes. And these people are inside on Shabbat. So you have one person who's camped out in number 1, number 2, number 3. And the 2 outer ones are megofafim. Ve'emtza'i eno megofaf. So what happens is that the external ones are wider than the internal, than the one in the middle. So what ends up happening if the one in the middle is narrower? Let's see if they have a picture. If the one that's in the middle is narrower than the one than the ones on the outside, yeah. So what you end up happening is that what you have so if you're standing in the one on the right, you have walls here. See, this guy sees walls. This guy doesn't see any walls. He sees open space, and this guy has walls also. See that? Because his space is wider. So his walls, look, right here and here. He is going to see, he's standing here, so he's going to see on his right and his left flanks of his own wall. This guy in the middle, his area is totally open to the other ones. Okay? Now, these 3 people have made an eruv with one another, let's say, because they want to share the space. But the question is, how many people do we consider to be living in these areas? Because we have a different halachic question here. Now, we're on the same general topic, which is when you have a large area and a small area, how do we deal with the relationship between the areas that are adjacent to one another? So we have a halakha in karpaf that says that you generally can't we know that you can't enclose a karpaf that's more than 5,000 square amot. And the same goes for if you make a makeshift mechitza like this. A makeshift mechitza means either it's only horizontal, like it's made only of ropes going across, or it's only vertical. It's made of sticks in the ground. So let's say you're camping out in the middle of nowhere. You want to enclose your area so you can move things around. So the easiest thing to do is probably put sticks in the ground. You're not going to build a wall around you. So the question is, how much space can be enclosed by a wall like that that's not really a real wall? So if it's just one person, he can have up to 5,000 square amot. He can have a bet satayim. If it's a caravan of people, we say they can have as much as they need. And a caravan is defined as 3 people. A caravan, a group, can have as much space as they need. So in this case, we have 3 people. And we want to know, since this person, one person on the right and the left and the middle, if we combined all of them together, we would have a caravan, right? But do we combine them together since you have 2 large areas and 1 small area in the middle? So Rashi says, what should we do? So he describes the case first. He says, these 3 people were traveling along the way. So we want to know, are they considered a caravan? So Rashi says, so the question here is, De'amrinan diureg gedolim bakatan, v'nimtzeu sheloshtan be'emtza'i, ha'emtza'i metzarfan, u'mutar emtza'i zeh kol shehu. So koshu gadol ekef b'mechitza shel sheti o shel eret ukigon she'ervu. So what he says is basically what you could say is that these 2 external people, okay, should be considered connected to the middle guy. The middle guy, his space is totally open to both of them. So he combines everybody together, and we could consider everybody together. In other words, the middle guy shares with both. The guy on the left, he has a wall of some sort. The guy on the right, he also has a wall of some sort. But the guy in the middle, he's open to both. So we say, you know what? The guy in the middle combines everybody, and because he combines everybody, he, in his area, can enclose as much as he wants with his makeshift walls. Because he in the middle has 3 people living with him in that enclosure. So we can make it even bigger. So that's the way that Rashi interprets this case. Now what happens? Emtsa'im megofaf v'shnayim achitzonim enan megofafin v'yachid b'zeh v'yachid b'zeh v'yachid b'zeh en notnin lahem ela bet shesh. So he says, if you were to have though the opposite case, the guy in the middle has the walls because he is the larger one, right? So he's the one who's able to see. So you reverse this and you have this. You have illustration 334. The guy in the middle sees walls between him and the guy on the left, and between him and the guy on the right, because they have a narrower space. They see right to him. The guy on the left sees right to him, the guy on the right sees right to him, but he sees walls separating him from either one. So therefore he cannot mitzaref. He cannot combine everybody together, because there's a separation between him and both guys. So therefore he can't say we're all together. He can't say we're all combining in my middle area. So therefore the middle area is going to have the limit of space. All 3 areas can only be 2 se'ah. Only 3, a bet satayim can only be the space of 5,000 square amot. All 3 areas, because each one is an individual enclosed in an enclosure which is a makeshift enclosure with only sticks in the ground. So it has a limit on 5,000 square amot. And it's not considered a caravan because the guy in the middle is not connected to the guys on the left and the right. He's separated from them. He can't say they're combined with him. So now we say, they asked the question, what if you had one guy in the left and one guy in the right, and 2 guys in the middle? So there's 2 guys in the middle. So wait a second. So now let's go back to our illustration for just a second and imagine that there are 2 guys in the middle. So why does this change the game a little bit? Because those 2 guys in the middle could say, hey, hold on. Where's the picture? These 2 guys, let's say there's 2 guys in here, and they see a guy over here, and they say, hey, you're with us, man. Or at least he could see them. Right? He could see them. But the problem is, they're still separated here. They have these walls here. But there's 2 in the middle. Okay, so that's the case. So if there's 2 in the middle, you have... by the way, so you have 1 on either side and 2 in the middle. So you could say, well, we could join. Two guys in the middle, the guy on the right can see them. So we'll say, you know what, you're with me. You two guys are with me. So let my place be expanded into the large area. And the guy on the other side says, no, you could be with me. In other words, they could be a part of either one. Either one could include those two guys, and then we could say 3 guys are living on the right side or 3 guys are living on the left side. And then we could expand it. O dilma chad le'achan nafik v'chad le'achan nafik. Or maybe we're going to say, no, since there's 2 guys in the middle, the guy on the right says, hey, one of you is with me. And the guy on the left says, one of you guys is with me. And then what ends up happening? You have only 2. You don't have 3 in one place. You don't have 3 in one place. So and if you're going to tell me that case is not good enough, so shnayim b'zeh u'shnayim b'zeh v'achad b'emtza'i, ma'u. Acha v'dai ila chanafik tzlatahavu v'ila chanafik tzlatahavu odilma emar lachanafik v'emar lachanafik. So the question is like this: that now you have, instead of having the 2 guys in the middle, you have 2 guys on the right, 2 guys on the left, and 1 guy in the middle. Okay, so and the 1 guy in the middle is separated because he's the one that has walls separating him, right? He sees the walls between himself and the right, between himself and the left. But the people on the left see him as part of their group, and the people on the right see him as part of their group. And there were 2 in either one. So it says either we could say that he goes with either one he goes with, he completes, or we say no. We can't decide. In other words, should we ascribe him to one or the other, to both, or to neither one? In other words, we don't know what to do with it. So Rashi says, do we say that since you have 2 people on both sides, we can allow both of them? In other words, we say the guy in the middle belongs to both, or maybe we say, no, we can't share the 1 guy in the middle. And since we can't share the 1 guy in the middle, what's the problem? We can't do anything. Because we can't slice him in half. We can't be Shlomo HaMelech, slice him in half. We'll share half. We can't do that. So therefore we're stuck, nobody has it. So the Gemara says, the halacha is ba'yam nekula. We say, we go leniently in all these in these questions. So we say that if you have a situation where either you have the 2 guys in the middle, right? Or when you have 2 guys in the middle, or you have 2 guys on either side and 1 guy in the middle, we say that both sides are able to say he goes with that. We're able to, because he shares an identity with both sides, and therefore we permit everybody to expand now to be more than 5,000 square amot. We allow both sides to expand to be more than 5,000 square amot, because the 2 guys on the left will say, we're a caravan, we include the middle guy. The people on the right say, we're a caravan, we include the middle guy. And they all expand their area, and it's no problem, according to the halacha. So Amar Rav Chisda says, Gidud, 5 umachitza, 5 in mitzarfin, ad she'o kotel begidud, o kulo b'machitza. O kulo begidud rather, o kulo b'machitza. So Rav Chisda says that when it comes to structures where you need a structure of 10 tefachim to create a wall, so he says you can't have 5 tefachim is elevation and 5 tefachim is wall. In other words, let's say you had a case where you have 2 chatzerot, 2 courtyards. Courtyard A and courtyard B are adjacent to one another, but courtyard B is 5 tefachim higher. The ground is elevated. It's 5 tefachim higher. So you'll say, well, no problem. I'll just make a mechitza of 5 tefachim, and then what do I have? 10 tefachim. Because if I'm standing in the lower one, I see 5 tefachim of elevated area, like what we have our mechitza, right? There's the step that you go up, so you have elevation, and then you have the wall. So you don't need as much wall if you have the elevation. So Rav Chisda says it's no good for the purpose of chatzerot. When it comes to chatzerot, you have to have either a 10 tefach wall or a 10 tefach elevation. But you can't have 5 tefachim of elevation and then you just put a 5 tefach wall. It has to be one or the other. So maybe there is an objection. Or sheyesh ba gidud hamishat umechitza hamisha me'arvin shenayim ve'en me'arvin echad. Pachot mikan me'arvin echad ve'en me'arvin shenayim. Didn't we learn in a baraita that if you have 2 chatzerot, one is higher than the other one? Either there's a wall of 10 tefachim between them, or you have gidud chamisha umechitza chamisha. You have an elevation of five tefachim plus a mechitza 5 tefachim. That separates the chatzerot, that they cannot make an eruv with one another anymore. They're totally separate. They're totally independent of one another. So what do you see from that? You see from that having 5 tefachim of elevation plus 5 tefachim of wall works. And now it says Amar Rava, it should say, not Rav, but Amar Rava. Modar Rav Chizda b'tachtona. Rav Chizda wasn't talking about from the perspective of the lower chatzer. Ho'il v'ro'eh pnei asara. Because the one who's the lower chatzer is ro'eh pnei asara, it sees 10 tefachim in front of it. Because it sees 5 tefachim. In other words, if you are standing in the lower chatzer, where is the top of the wall? At the 10 tefachim height. Because you have 5 tefachim of elevation, 5 tefachim of wall, no problem. But if you're in the higher chatzer, you only see 5 tefachim. You don't see the 10. So that's what Rav Chizda was talking about. So now he says, if that's true, tachtona te'arev shenayim v'lo te'arev achad, elyona lo te'arev lo achad v'lo shenayim. But according to that, the lower chatzer should not be able to make an eruv with the upper chatzer. And the upper chatzer should be stuck. It shouldn't be able to make its own eruv or with the lower chatzer. Why? It can't make with the lower chatzer because from the perspective of the lower chatzer, they're separate. And it can't make its own because from its own perspective, they're connected. So the upper chatzer should be in a big problem because the upper chatzer sees only a 5 tefach separation, so it sees itself as part of the lower chatzer. The lower chatzer sees a 10 tefach separation. They say, we're not part of you. So the upper chatzer is in big trouble. They can't do anything. So the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Ula says, Kigon shaita elyona migofefet ad 10 amot. What it's talking about is where the upper chatzer had flanks, had side walls up to 10 amot. Okay, with a 10 amma separation in between them. So Rashi explains here, what does it mean? Mechitza asara ala gidud ad 10 amot emtayot. So what it means is that the upper chatzer had a wall actually that was 10 tefachim. But there was in the middle of that, it was broken. And in the middle, there was only the 5 tefach area. Okay, and the space where it's only 5 tefachim is less than 10 amot. Because remember, if there's a breach in the wall that's less than 10 amot, then it's still considered a doorway. So if you're standing in the upper chatzer, what do you see? On the right side, you see a wall of 10 tefachim, and on the left side, you see a wall of 10 tefachim. And in the middle, you see, let's say, 9 amot of space, or up to 10 amot of space, where there's only a 5 tefachim. So from the upper chatzer, what do you have? A doorway. Basically, you have walls that separate you, but you also have an opening. So you have both, an opening and doors. So therefore, you could actually combine with the lower chatzer if you wanted to. So the Gemara says, wait a second. But if that's true, if that's true, right? Why then does it say that the upper chatzer can only make its own eruv and it can't combine? Okay, or I'm sorry, why does it say me'arvin echad ve'en me'arvin shenai? Right, that it can only that each one has to make its own chatzer, its own eruv. Why would that be the case? So I keep missaying it. Me'arvin echad means that they can be ma'ariv together. Ve'en ma'arvin shenayim means that they can't make their own separate one. Why is that? Ibaya chad te'arev, ibaya terei te'arev. So he says, if they want, they should be able to make one eruv. In other words, with the lower chatzer. Why? Because the upper one sees itself as potentially part of the lower one, because they have the opening in their wall. And the lower one sees itself as potentially part of the higher one. In other words, it says pachot mikan. In other words, if you're in the lower chatzer and you have only a 9 tefach wall instead of 10, and from the perspective of the upper chatzer, you have these 2 walls on the side and an opening in the middle. That's, let's say, only 4 tefachim or whatever it is. So then, from both sides, they should be able to combine together if they want to. What's the problem then? So Amar Rabba B'rei Rava. Rabba B'rei Rava says, Kegon shenifritza tachtona b'milu'a le'elyona. So what it's talking about, what it must be talking about is where the lower chatzer is completely open at some point to the upper chatzer. So then the Gemara says, if that's true, yachi tachtona chad te'arev tzrei lo te'arev, and elyona ibayat tzrei te'arev ibaya chad te'arev, then you should have the following situation. In other words, if the lower one is completely open at some spot to the upper one, then you have a situation where the lower one shouldn't have a choice. They should have to be. In other words, any case that we figure out here doesn't seem to work out. Right? So if the lower one's open to the upper one, and that's why they're forced to participate, so then they shouldn't have a choice either. So then the upper one should be the only one that has a choice. Because since the upper one at least has walls there, they could say, we don't want anything to do with the lower one. Even though it's open to us, we don't want to do with it. And if they want to, they can join. And the lower one should have to join, because theirs is open to the upper one. In Achinami, that's correct. That's absolutely right. And when it said less than 10 tefachim, you can make one eruv, but not two. We're talking about atachtona. We're only talking about the lower one. In other words, in that case, let's see if they have an illustration to show these various permutations so we can understand. Okay? So, what you have is, over here, so you have a situation. First of all, the first case was Migofefet. The upper chatzer, this is the gidud, this is the elevation. And this is illustration 337. And then you have the wall. So from the perspective of the people in the upper chatzer, we said, Rabbah added that they have 10 tefachim. They see 10 tefachim on the sides, just not in the middle. In the middle, they only see 5 tefachim. So that's like a doorway. That gives them the option to combine. But these people on the bottom shouldn't have an option to combine at all, because they can only see 10. So then what did we say? Okay, so let's look at the case where you have less than 10 tefachim. So if you're in the chatzer tachtona, you're in the lower chatzer. So then what the situation is going to be that you're really open to this chatzer, because you have less than 10 tefachim. So then of course the question became, well, how can they even ever have an option? So in that case, they don't have an option. In that case, they don't have an option. They have to make an eruv with the upper. The upper one, since they have on either side walls over here, don't have to make an eruv with the lower one. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. Since the upper one has complete walls on either side, even though it's open here, there's less than 10 tefachim separating them in the middle. The upper one still has its own integrity. It's able to make its own eruv because of the sides. The lower one that's completely open, when it's completely open, it must make an eruv with the upper one. When it has 10 tefachim, even if half of that 10 tefachim is made from the elevation and half of it is made from the wall, it doesn't matter. They're completely blocked from being able to make an eruv then with the upper. Okay? And the reason why the upper is not in trouble, even though in the upper they can only see 10 tefachim, they can see only 5 tefachim in this area separating them from the chatzer below. Over here, though, they see 10 tefachim separating them. So the point is that the upper chatzer doesn't have to see 10 tefachim at every point. They only have to see the 10 tefachim on the sides. That's the illustration on illustration 337. Even if in the middle they see less. The lower chatzer, on the other hand, always sees at least 10 tefachim. Over here, they see more, separating them from themselves and the chatzer. Okay, the upper chatzer. If that opening in the center had more than 10 amot, then now the chatzer above would be in big trouble. Because even though they have flanks on the sides, their doorway is too large. It's more than 10 amot, and now they're considered totally wide open to the small chatzer, and they would be dependent on making an eruv with the small chatzer. Okay, that's the way that would work. So it turns out to look like a case that's pretty familiar to us. Darash Marimar taught Gidud Chamisha Chitza Chamisha Mitztarfin. I disagree. I say that an elevation of 5 and plus a wall of 5 is good enough, meaning that even that upper chatzer would be fine, because they can count the elevation plus the wall, according to Marimar. Ashkechei Ravina the Rav Acha B'rei the Rava. Ravina found Rav Acha the son of Rava. Amar he said to him, Tanei mar midi b'mchitza did the master teach anything regarding mechitza? Did he say any new halacha regarding mechitza? He said to him, Amar le, lo. He said no. And what's the halacha? In other words, he wanted to find out if this report about Mareimar was true. So he said, did Mareimar say anything about mechitza today? And they denied it. They said, no, he didn't say that thing that you heard, that elevation of 5 plus a wall of 5 is enough. No, he didn't say that. But the halacha is that a combination of 5 tefachim of elevation and 5 tefachim of wall counts. For both sides. So that would mean in mechitza, even here, that would count. If you had 5 tefachim elevation, even though a person standing in the upper place, let's say in the balcony or in the upper area, would be only sees 5 tefachim of wall, that doesn't matter as long as there's 5 tefachim elevation from the lower area underneath. That's the conclusion. So now, Rav Hoshaya asked a question. So we've seen this question come up before in the Masekhet, but it's revisiting a question that we've had in other forms in the past. If new people come into a chatzer on Shabbat, do they prohibit everybody? In other words, everyone who lives in the chatzer made an eruvei chatzerot before Shabbat. Now some new people show up on Shabbat and they're in the chatzer. Do they affect the status? So he says, Amar Rav Chizda said, and according to the Bach, it should say Rav Chinena. Tashema, come and listen. It says that if a large chatzer is wide open to a smaller chatzer, the large one is permitted and the small one is prohibited. Because it's like an opening to the large one, and we said before, because the large one is going to have gifufim, it's going to have the flanks on the side that the people in the large one see themselves as distinct from the small one. They're not going to carry from their chatzer into the small one because they see where theirs ends. So there's no problem of them having their own eruvei chatzerot without the small one. Amar Rabbah. So what's the implication? So Rav Chinena, or it says Rav Chizda in our text, but it means Rav Chinena, said that you see that even though this break from the large one to the small one happened on Shabbat, it doesn't affect the status of the large one. Okay, it doesn't affect the status. It's going to prohibit. So I'm sorry, the other way around. It is going to affect the status of the small one. Right. Okay. The small one is going to get in trouble because the small one is now wide open to the large one. Okay, so he says that this is a problem, that the small one now is wide open to the large one. It's going to be prohibited. So if they had their own eruvei chatzerot, the large one had its own and the small one had its own, and now the small one is completely open on its one side to the large one, so now its eruvei chatzerot is going to be ruined and the large one is going to be fine. So you see that the game can change on Shabbat. On Shabbat itself, it can affect. So he says to him, no. Amar le Abai said to him, Lo temar. So he says to him, Amar Rabba said, Emar mi ba'od yom nifritza. We'll just say that's talking about where it happened before Shabbat. In other words, what it means is that if the small chatzer became totally open to the large chatzer before Shabbat, now the small chatzer has to make an eruv with the large chatzer if they want to be able to carry. Before Shabbat. It didn't happen on Shabbat. If it happened on Shabbat, it won't affect their status. And in fact, Amar le Abaye says, Lotem Amar Emar. Don't say, let us say. It definitely, it definitely means that it happened before Shabbat. It's not just speculation. The Amar, because it was the master himself that said. They asked Rav Huna, Rav Yehuda, and they asked Rav Yehuda, Erev derech hapetach v'nistama petach, Erev derech hachalon v'nistama chalon ma'u v'amar li Shabbat kevan shehutra. That there was that they asked Rav Yehuda and they asked Rav Huna the same question. If you have 2 chatzerot that are connected by a window or by a door, and the door or the window became stopped up on Shabbat, what's the din? Does it ruin the eruv that they made? So the answer is no. For each Shabbat, we look. Once it was permitted for that Shabbat for them to transfer objects from one chatzer to the other, it's that way for the entire Shabbat. We don't care that that now they can't get through that passageway anymore. They could still transfer over the wall or whatever they need to. No problem. So same thing. If the chatzer gets broken open to the other one on Shabbat, it's not going to change the status of the of anything. That if it happened on Shabbat, if it happened before Shabbat, it would change the status. But if it happened on Shabbat, it wouldn't. And if somebody joins the Chatzer on Shabbat, it won't affect you.
Is it outside the Beit Shemashul, right?
Right, before sundown. Itmar was stated, if you have a wall between two chatzirot that fell on Shabbat, Rav says now you can't carry more than 4 amot. Why? Because each of these chatzirot had their own independent eruvei chatzirot, and now they're all combined into one because the wall that separated them has fallen, and they don't have a connection with one another, and they're all one chatzer. That's what Rav says. Shmuel says, no, each one just stays in their own area. Okay? Walk up to the place that you would have been able to walk up to. As Rashi says, okay? That since it's permitted, it's permitted. In other words, that you're allowed to carry even from your house into your chatzer and all throughout the chatzer, and anything that was in the chatzer from before Shabbat can go to the other chatzer just like it normally would be able to, because we know that things that are in the chatzer from before Shabbat can go even to another chatzer. But the point is that Shmuel is saying that the original eruvei chatzerot, even though the wall in between the two chatzerot has fallen, and now the entire thing is one place, we don't change their status from before Shabbat. Since when Shabbat started, they were 2 different chatzerot, and each one had an eruv, they can walk up to the line, the boundary line that they had before Shabbat, no problem. And even the statement of Rav wasn't explicitly stated, it was implied. How so? Because Rav and Shmuel were in a certain courtyard on Shabbat, and the wall fell that was in between the 2 chatzerot. So now we're all one chatzer. What do? Amar lahu Shmuel. Shmuel said, "Shakolu glima nagiduba." He said, "Take my cloak and cover over the opening. Carry my cloak over to the opening and cover it." Which means what? You can carry in the chatzer. In other words, you can carry even though the cloak I wore from inside my house, you can still carry it over to the chatzer, to the wall of the chatzer, and just drape it over there. And then what happened? Ahadrinu Rav le'apei. Rav turned his back to Shmuel. He was very upset. He snubbed him. Amarlo. So they said. So Amarlo Shmuel. Shmuel said to the people, "I kapid Abba." If Abba is upset, that was what he was calling Rav. If he's upset, so it says Shakolo Hemyane. It should say, take his belt v'katruba and use that to tie it. Okay, so and Rashi says Kechu avneto, take his belt v'kishruba talit machitza, and tie my talit to the machitza with his belt. In other words, he's misbehaving. Take his belt away. So what do you see then? Rav held that once the wall fell, they couldn't carry anymore, and Shmuel held that they could. So now the Gemara says, "V'lishmuel lama liha ha amar ze metaltel adikar machitza v'ze metaltel adikar machitza." If Shmuel holds that you're allowed to carry in this courtyard when the wall has fallen, why does he tell them to drape his talit over the opening? Why do you need the talit? The answer is not because of the mechitza, but because Shmuel avid letzniuta be'alma. He just wanted privacy. He didn't want everybody from the next chatzer to be looking in, so he put it there for privacy, but really he held you could carry. So if Rav held, now we have a question on Rav. If Rav thought that what Shmuel was doing was wrong, carrying the talit in the courtyard, why doesn't he tell him something? Why doesn't he say something? Why doesn't he object? Why doesn't he intervene? The answer is because Atre de Shmuel Hava, it was Shmuel's domain. Shmuel was the rabbi there. He was the Marad Atra, and he wasn't going to say anything. So if that's the case, so if that's true, why does Rav turn his back on Shmuel? If Shmuel is really, if Rav is respecting the domain, the jurisdiction of Shmuel, why does he turn his back on him? The answer is because he didn't want people to think he agreed with it. He wanted to show people, I disagree with this, but I'm not going to say anything. So he did enough to say, I don't agree, but he didn't do more than that because he didn't want to disrespect Shmuel's authority. However, in the end, the halacha actually follows Shmuel, that if a wall falls between two chatzerot, or any other change occurs between the two chatzerot on Shabbat, the status that they had at the beginning of Shabbat persists for the entire Shabbat.